I remember the first time I saw the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. It was at Northrop Auditorium in Minneapolis. Or was it at O'Shaughnessy in St. Paul? It doesn't matter where, because I was transported right out of my chair. I was 20 years old, or maybe I was 30, but that doesn't really matter either. I was transported out of time into the past and future simultaneously, witnessing people and dance and beauty I had never imagined were possible. Founded by dancer and choreographer Alvin Ailey in 1958, that theater is one of the most acclaimed dance companies in the world. Forged during a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement, Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater was established to uplift the African American experience while transcending boundaries of race, faith, and nationality with its universal humanity, according to their website. As the company grew, Mr. Ailey invited dancers of all backgrounds to be part of his vision while reimagining his company as a library of dance, a home for a wide range of choreographers' works that might otherwise be lost, the first modern dance company of its kind. I remember that night at Northrop or O'Shaughnessy as I opened my eyes wider and wider so I wouldn't miss any blessed moment of Ailey's imagination unfolding in the bodies of the dancers and their movement. The last moment of the last piece will live in my mind forever. There was a tall male dancer walking slowly down stage right, looking off into the distance. And then suddenly, quickly, a small dancer ran right up onto the back of another dancer and then stepped right up onto the tall dancer's shoulders, both feet, right on top. And there they stood, looking out into the distance in a shaft of light, while the rest of the dancers receded into the background and the stage was plunged into darkness. I don't remember the name of the piece or the music, but the message was clear. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. We wouldn't be here without them. And it is our job to take what they gave us and imagine the future. Whose shoulders are we standing on? How do we make our own shoulders strong enough for the next generation? What do we need to imagine? Our ancestors in the faith could not have imagined exactly who we would be now and the challenges we face when they gathered at early candlelight in Rogers Building in Milwaukee in August 1841 to discuss the possibility of forming a Unitarian congregation. But they labored with great joy and intent so that we could be here. Our ancestors in the faith could not have imagined that immigrants would continue to be integral to our country, our economy, and our culture. They could not have imagined that there would be 2 world wars, that a Jesuit priest from Latin America would be elected pope, that interracial marriage and marriage equality for same-gender couples would become legal, that court rulings and due process would be disregarded by a US president, that a tax would be made on judges and judicial independence, that a powerful Black Christian minister would be arrested for praying for the poor in public in our Capitol Rotunda, that 1,500 lawyers and their allies would pack the plaza outside of Manhattan's federal courthouse to defend the rule of law, holding up pocket-sized US constitutions and reaffirming their oath. Our ancestors in the faith could not imagine that a black man would be elected President of the United States in 2008, that you would call a female minister to serve First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee in 2009, that a black woman would run for President of the United States and, let us say, almost win in 2024, and that the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee search team would hire a black minister in 2025. They could not have imagined these things. Or maybe they could. Maybe they laid the foundation of this religious community with imagination and dreams, which we will never know. And they did not know who would build on that foundation later and what we would build. You might be familiar with the true story of the 3 bricklayers. After the Great Fire of 1666 that leveled London, the world's most famous architect, Sir Christopher Wren, was commissioned to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral. One day in 1671, Sir Wren observed 3 bricklayers on a scaffold, one crouched, one half standing, and one standing tall, working hard and fast. To the first bricklayer, Christopher Wren asked the question, "What are you doing?" To which the bricklayer replied, "I'm a bricklayer. I'm cutting this stone to a certain size and shape." He was doing a task. The second bricklayer responded, "Well, I'm a builder. I'm building a wall. I'm working hard laying bricks so that I can feed my family." He was earning a living. But the third bricklayer, when asked the question, "What are you doing?" replied with a gleam in his eye, "I am a cathedral builder. I'm helping Sir Christopher Wren build St. Paul's Cathedral for the Almighty." American businessman and motivational speaker Stephen Covey said, "Live out of your imagination, not your history." But I think we need to do both. We need to learn and live out of our history by using our imagination, especially in these times when history is being erased. In the current issue of Time, an article was published called "The Battle for Our Memory is the Battle for Our Country" by Kimberly W. Crenshaw. She wrote, "On June 7, 2020, Representative John Lewis made his last public appearance at the Black Lives Matter mural painted on the road adjacent to the White House. Just 5 years later, the destruction of the Black Lives Matter Plaza in March 2025 is of a piece with other efforts to bury any recognition of the past, from censoring words and banning books to defunding education and threatening museums. These are not mere excesses in cost cutting. Wiping out our collective memory is part of the targeted strategy to suppress historical literacy, empathy, and our capacity to fight for a racially just society." Crenshaw continues, "In his biography, John Lewis revealed how Emmett Till's lynching and Mamie Till's courageous demand that the world bear witness to the profound savagery of white supremacy was a pivotal moment in awakening an entire generation of young Black Americans. Lewis and his contemporaries, the Freedom Riders, the sit-in demonstrators, and the youth-led wing of the movement were part of the Emmett Till generation. 9 years after Till's death, the movement this generation went on to advance gave us not only the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Medicaid, and other civil rights advances, they also poured a foundation upon which the rights of other marginalized groups could be legally enshrined. These hard-fought victories chipped away at the legacy of slavery and the infrastructure of Jim Crow, while widening the democratic imagination to include indigenous rights, the women's movement, marriage equality, disability rights, and many others. She wrote similarly in the aftermath of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's killings, murals of their faces and demands to say her name invited a new generation of young people to reckon with the very real, very human costs of racist policies. The painted over Black Lives Matter's murals are not so different from the erasure of the database of facts and evidence of January 6th from the Department of Justice, the dismantling of the Department of Education, and the firing of thousands of federal workers dedicated to a functioning government to support our rights. She said these are all part of a widespread effort to move away from the possibility of a diverse democracy by making people forget the stakes, the challenges, and the capacity to overcome. But we will not forget, will we? We will continue to use our imaginations to build awareness, to build resistance, and create the world we dream of. For example, May Day. The labor movement and the immigrant rights movement come together on May Day to celebrate their collective strength and encourage people to imagine what it would be like to have a day without immigrants and workers. Can you imagine that? Our economy would not function. May Day is also an opportunity to learn about history. May 1st was chosen to be International Workers' Day to commemorate the 1886 Haymarket incident in Chicago. On May 1st, 1886, there was a general strike to promote the 8-hour workday. Imagine that. I would like an 8-hour workday, quite frankly. Sorry. I digress. Well, you know, people had to fight for that, right? They had to sacrifice. On May 4th, the police acted to disperse a public assembly in support of the strike when an unidentified person threw a bomb, and the police responded by firing on the workers. The event led to several deaths and many injuries. Labor leaders and sympathizers were later rounded up, and 4 were executed by hanging after a trial that was broadly seen as a miscarriage of justice. You may or may not also be familiar with the Bayview tragedy here in Milwaukee. On May 4th, 1886, thousands of laborers in Milwaukee went on strike to demand an 8-hour workday. They were met by hundreds of National Guardsmen at Iron Company Rolling Mill in Bayview. On May 5th, the crowd was fired upon by local militia, killing 7 people. It makes me wonder, what were the Unitarians doing in Milwaukee during that era of history? They were involved in many charitable works in the city, and they were thinking about building their 3rd church, laying the foundation of this building in which we sit today. Our congregation was founded in 1842 after the folks who gathered at early candlelight in August 1841 arranged for Reverend Joseph Harrington to come up from Chicago and give a series of Unitarian sermons in the Milwaukee courthouse. Reverend Harrington wrote in his report to the AUA in Boston, "The audiences were exciting in the extreme." Harrington came back to Milwaukee to deliver 14 more Unitarian lectures during 2 weeks in April of 1842, with the courthouse often full. In May 1842, our Unitarian congregation was founded with 40 male adults, that's what it says in the record, 40 male adults as subscribing members. The founding trustees of our congregation include Eli Bates, the first school teacher and lighthouse keeper in Milwaukee, John Tweedy, attorney, William Prentice, attorney and future mayor, and Dr. Loomis, physician. The trustees wrote an earnest letter to Boston soliciting money so they could hire a minister. The letter said the Milwaukee settlement, it was not yet a city, quote, had great freedom of thought and liberality of sentiment. Every dogma and creed undergoes the most severe scrutiny of reason. In consequence, many of the most thinking men, finding themselves compelled to reject the absurd doctrines of the orthodox, have been afloat without any defined religious beliefs. Hence, the need for a Unitarian church in Milwaukee. Our first church building was built in 1843, a small frame building with 53 pews. Unfortunately, by 1849, many Milwaukeeans were troubled financially, and the congregation was not able to pay the mortgage. Under foreclosure, the building was sold to St. James Episcopal Church, and Unitarianism in Milwaukee went dormant for 7 years. In 1856, someone named A.F. Clark, a Milwaukee realtor who wanted to revive the Unitarian Church, attended the annual Western Unitarian Conference in Chicago, because this was out west back then. He convinced the Reverend William Greenleaf Eliot from St. Louis to come up to Milwaukee to see what might be done. So one Sunday morning, Reverend Eliot just appeared in Milwaukee unannounced at Clark's home, ready to lead worship. Clark and another prominent member, William Metcalf, whose bust is in our parlor, hurriedly drove about in their carriages to notify the Unitarians, pulled together enough people for a worship service at 11 a.m. at Metcalf's house on Cass Street. And it must have been a great service, because after the service, Reverend Eliot asked for a piece of paper and wrote out a pledge of $500 toward a new church building. Before the meeting adjourned, the 40 people there had pledged $6,500, and by that evening, a site was selected. They planned to buy a small building from the Presbyterians and move it to the site. But when it became known that the Presbyterian building was to be sold to the Unitarians, the Presbyterian women held an indignation meeting. And the sale was called off. So the Unitarians had their second building constructed, completed in 1857 with 28 families in the membership. The congregation grew so fast that they had to enlarge that building by the next year, and they did it by cutting the structure in half and adding a section in the middle. Our society decided to incorporate in 1859 with Edward P. Alice, manufacturer, ring a bell, and Charles F. Isley, is that how you say that? Banker, ring a bell, and William Metcalf, shoe manufacturer. So these trustees incorporated our society. They're clearly from the elite of the city. So I don't know, a few decades later, if any of our members were actually among the laborers who went on strike in May Day of 1886. Although the resurgence of our congregation thrived until 1872, we again fell on hard times. Our society closed the church for a year and then rented it out for 2 years, and the society was reactivated in 1875 and back in business. So that enthusiasm, the extreme excitement of 1841, that energy was banked in embers and then came back to life more than once. Now, I don't think we usually think of ourselves as historic, but we are. I don't think of myself as historic, but I am. And this is why I'm historic. I'm the first female called minister of the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. That's my claim to fame, right? Okay? So I'm naturally curious about the history of women in this society. Our church history says women were involved in many service and community projects, including something called the Flower Mission, to bring flowers and reading matter to those in hospital and supply food to those in need. Unitarian women of that era took part in founding or managing the Industrial School for Girls, Protestant Orphan Asylum, Protestant Home for the Aged, and the Friendship House. One of our women helped organize the Visiting Nurse Association. In 1890, a special meeting of our congregation was held to discuss increasing the number of trustees and stipulated that some of them be women. Okay, they said some of them be ladies, but you know. Also in 1890, our congregation decided to sell its second building and construct its third building where we sit today. Now this is interesting. While this building was being constructed, the Unitarians held services with supply ministers at the Athenaeum, which was built in 1887 and has been home to the Women's Club of Wisconsin. So a group of prominent Milwaukee women founded the Women's Club of Wisconsin in 1876. And in 1886, the Women's Club created something called Pioneer Women's Stock Company, the nation's first stock venture to be completely owned by women. A lot was purchased on Kilbourne Avenue in 1887, and the Women's Club moved into their new home. The Athenaeum, they called it, became the first building in the United States to be wholly owned by women. Coincidentally or not, one of our congregation's supply ministers during that time was the Unitarian minister, Reverend Gertrude B. McGill. Gertrude B. McGill of Philadelphia. Curious about my sister of the cloth, I visited our First Church archives at UWM last month and learned that Reverend McGill preached once a month in our second church building on Cass Street in October and November of 1890, and continued to preach once a month when we held services at the Athenaeum in December of 1890 through March of 1891. And given the wonders of the internet, Reverend Kimberly found a photo of her online. We think it's her. We think it's Gertrude. The dates match. And if it is her, she had 5 sisters, the eldest of which was the first woman to earn a PhD in the United States. I know. Just a couple more interesting connections. The prominent architect George Bowman Ferry, who designed the Athenaeum, also designed this church building for the Unitarians. Coming full circle, my installation ceremony in November of 2009 was held at St. James Episcopal Church just down the street so we'd have room for everyone. The same St. James Church who bought our second church building in foreclosure. That's not the building, but you know, you get the point. And when Reverend Jennifer was installed as your senior minister in April of 2016, we held her installation service just down the street at Emmanuel Presbyterian, despite their history of indignation. Who could have imagined? Theologian Walter Brueggemann, author of The Prophetic Imagination, wrote, "Our culture is competent to implement almost anything and to imagine almost nothing, because imagination is a danger. Thus, every totalitarian regime," he wrote, "is frightened of the artist. It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing alternative futures to the single one the king wants to urge as the only thinkable option. Nicole Presley, on behalf of the UU Side with Love team, sent a letter of encouragement to all UU congregations on April 30th, saying, "We believe in a world where everyone is free and thriving, where democracy is realized, where our bodies, our identities, and our earth are honored and sacred, where love is not just a feeling, but a force for liberation." So as we mark the first 100 days of this administration, we do so with full hearts. We lament the cruelty on display, she wrote, but we also rejoice in the rising, the awakening of thousands to action, resistance, and the power of community. Some days, she said, it feels like we're walking through a storm with no map, moving through brutal winds of injustice and thick fogs of fear. But even in the storm, we carry something precious, a fire we refuse to let go out. Judith Jameson, legendary dancer and artistic director of the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater for 21 years, said in a documentary about Ailey's life and untimely death, "You see in films this dramatic exhale as people die, the death rattle. But when Alvin died, he breathed in and never breathed out again. He breathed in. That's it. So we're his breath out. We are his breath out. We are." To conclude, I return to my earlier question. Whose shoulders are we standing on? How do we make our own shoulders strong enough to support the next generation? Whose breath are we breathing out? And how will we keep our imaginations alive to build the world we dream of? What do we need to imagine?